Greetings, webheads, and welcome to a very special episode of Witty Banter. We are here at AdeptiCon, and we have with us Will Shick. Will, thanks for joining us.
Heck yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here in person with y'all this time.
Yeah. So how's the convention going? We're Saturday, we're kind of winding up towards the end. What do you think? How's it been going?
I mean, personally, I think it's been going great. Every time I walk into the hall, it's completely filled with players. We had all of the Worlds events, like first round today. I know we had the last chance qualifiers yesterday. We seem to be having a great time. We had an amazing roadmap, I think, last night, and we've been seeing players get their hands and first-hand experience on Marvel Crisis Protocol Alliances, so I'm pretty happy. I hope you all are happy, but I'm very happy.
We're thrilled. This is all of our first AdeptiCon, so
amazing.
We're having a blast. We're having a blast. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Dave, and we're each going to just kind of pep you a little bit, and let's see what we can do. David?
All right, so my question is, when it comes to character rebalances, right? So how does the characters that you're designing now affect the rebalances of other characters? Like, for example, you said that War Machine was going to get changed, right? Mm-hmm. And so, how do you go about that, compared to, say, Ironmonger? Because, Ironmonger's fantastic, but, they're both 3 threats, and they're both kind of similar. And so, how does that design change when it comes to character rebalances versus what you like?
That's a pretty nuanced kind of question, but it's a great one. Really, sometimes if there's parallel development, for example, we're working on a rebalance of War Machine and we're working on Ironmonger, we might take a look at them side by side and say, okay, are they offering different things? What are they doing within their affiliations? Because I think that's an important difference, right? You can have certain characters, like an Ironmonger might be very, very strong compared to War Machine in the basic analysis, but maybe War Machine gives something to his affiliations that they really want or they really need, and therefore his power level isn't always wrapped up in the and we may not expect War Machine to be splashed, whereas we might expect an Ironmonger to splash. So there are extenuating circumstances and considerations about that. A lot of the times, I think that doesn't necessarily line up. So what does happen is we will look at there's kind of two ways, right? One is that we've created let's say Ironmonger, and we say, now's the time to look at War Machine. War Machine and Ironmonger are very similar. What worked with Ironmonger that we might want to translate into War Machine? What worked with some of these other characters that are similar to War Machine? The alternate is that we are working on a rebalance for War Machine first, and then we get to Ironmonger. Now War Machine might be a baseline where we say, okay, well, this is what we kind of did with War Machine. We want to ensure that these are similar threats. We have these considerations for them, so we will look to what the rebalance is for War Machine, and that will influence the new development. For the most part, character rebalances are really based on where we feel the game at whole is, rather than looking at specific characters, even if there are similarities. Now, if characters share abilities or something like that, they share certain battlefield roles, we will borrow ideas that have worked from one to the other. But we try to keep a holistic approach. So a rebalance really is, what was the core idea of the character? What do we need to do to make that core identity work? And very rarely do we go about changing the fundamental nature if we can avoid it, right? So with War Machine specifically, it's okay, where did he kind of fall down? Where does he need to be better? We looked a lot at the super attack and his ability to reload and how that interaction really wasn't landing with players. How do we make that more functional? And then is he deficient in stamina? Does he need to be tankier, right? Can we just make him a true tank? So we might increase stamina significantly more than a 3 threat. And those other types of things. So it's never really done in a vacuum or even by a comparison. It's usually done based on looking at the aggregate whole of the game and trying to account for everything as the same way we do with a new character. So it is a bit of a fresh look. We just happen to have a design to build from rather than nothing to go off of to begin with, right? We're not starting fresh. Instead, we're starting with what we have and then going about renovating or reimagining it wholesale depending on what's needed.
How does that include character nerfs? How do you go about considering that when you look at, say, we all know that Chi is a problem, right? So other characters who are comparable to Chi, maybe they don't get nerfs, but Chi does. How do you go about deciding what nerfs need to happen?
It's a similar experience to like the buffs or the increases, right? The tap downs are slightly easier, sort of, in a weird way, because players will very quickly identify like these are the things this character is doing that we feel like are out of line, or the complaints are typically the same, whereas the power level going up is a little more difficult to, like, this character just doesn't do anything. What does that mean, right? We have to do a lot more work to figure out where that sentiment is coming from. Players might say, like, this attack isn't very good, or the spender is really bad. Sometimes we'll get a good identifier, like with War Machine specifically, right? It was very clear that the chance to daze yourself wasn't worth the offset of the offensive power from the spender, right? And in that case, you have very actionable items. But usually when players feel like something is under the curve, there's a lot of different feelings or thoughts about why that under the curve is. When something is over the curve, players pretty consistently often will identify the same thing or the same pattern. So with Shang-Chi, it's his ability to easily displace, the way in which his offensive power might be a little bit overtuned for his threat value, these types of things. And in that case, you're really looking at, okay, what is the player data telling you? And then we'll start from that point and we'll say, okay, well, how would we adjust that? We can math it out and say, do we agree? Like, is this a real thing, or does it feel like, offensive output and damage potential is very, very easy to kind of establish because it's a math problem. At its baseline, obviously there's a lot more variables that go into it, but we can start from the repeated statements or complaints, use that as a place to start identifying, and then it becomes more difficult because once you identify the problem, the fix that is suggested or the initial fixes you might think about are not always the ones that fix the problem. And so then it comes around to like, okay, well, how are we going to adjust like Shang-Chi's displacement? What do we need to do with that? If we adjust the range at which he can 1 inch punch and we make it 1 inch, does that actually solve the problem? Because now he has to get a lot closer to engage. It makes him much more vulnerable to counterattacks, these types of things. Do we need to adjust the power cost for that ability? Is it too cheap and we need to tax the power economy? Do we need to lower the spender because he has too much power? And that's where the nuances of testing and iterations really come into it. But it's a similar process where effectively you're looking at something and you're saying, okay, we're going to go back to this design. We've identified these problems from the community and the discourse and the data we've pulled from all of this. How would we go about addressing them? And that's not really dissimilar from how we do playtesting in general, right? We just have a much larger data aggregate in order to be able to pull from and to try to identify things that we might have missed or might have been overlooked during the testing cycle. Because at the end of the day, we have like 100-some playtesters globally, in addition to all the games we can play internally. But that is dwarfed by the amount of games that can be played in about 6 months, or even less by the community itself, because it's so large after 7 years. But yeah, it's not, typically we're not trying to do cross comparisons. We accept the fact that, and always have, that the threat values there's a pretty wide range of power variation between the threat values, and we feel like that's okay in order to keep the game the way we want it to be, to keep the game and the character selection pretty selectable. And for the most part, where those stresses really start to show up usually is in the higher competitive, where you have players that are really playing to exploit, min-maxing and efficiencies and all that stuff. But in a more casual setting or a more standard like game, tabletop, we're just playing a pickup game, that range can be pretty large, and player skill kind of covers it or makes it less so. It's only when you get into environments like this, and that's always the balance too. It's like, well, we're never going to make the game perfectly balanced. How do we get to that imperfect balance where skill expression by player is still the deciding factor for the most part, along with dice randomness and these other, but rarely do you see comparisons go. Now, future development, things we haven't started on, are absolutely very much foundationally defined by the changes that we've made, by the problems that we've identified, right? The goal is not to repeat the mistakes of the past. So you learn from what didn't quite work, you learn from what did work, you borrow from all that, and you kind of move forward, right? Like Apocalypse was a great initial example of a very unique leadership style where he's handing out new abilities to character. Were we ever to do another character like that with a leadership style similar again, we've learned a lot from what worked with Apocalypse, what didn't work with Apocalypse, so we would start from a much stronger place. And that's, I think, really where previous development, whether it's, how the character came out, how the character was tuned down, how the character was tuned up, that's where it really matters. And I think that's why, ideally modern characters are always slightly ahead of the curve of everything else because they have this foundation of knowledge of the past that we get to work from that we didn't have when we worked on the last batch of characters, right?
So, we know that Bullseye's been the only character that you've adjusted threat on. Are there going to be any other characters that may get adjusted threat up or down?
You make me think about this one. To my memory, and granted, the next adjustment is quite substantial because it does set a new baseline for stamina. So, like, a ton of characters were adjusted, especially in the 3-threat and the 4-threat range specifically. No one had a threat adjustment made. We almost did it with She-Hulk, but instead of adjusting her threat, we actually strongly redesigned her, and now she has an injured side. And so she really kind of sings better as a leader due to like the survivability increase of being able to flip, her ability to be able to be in the middle of the scrum and that kind of stuff, and not have the same drawbacks that she did with the Hulk, with the kind of the original Hulk design of not having an injured side and you just being able to blitz through her health and then having her removed from the table. But otherwise, and there was one other one we talked about it with Hulkbuster too, but we wound up not doing that one, to my memory, if memory serves correctly. And instead we tried it, it didn't quite work, so we did some pretty dramatic like over designs on his abilities and everything, and so we brought him to a place that the playtesters were really enjoying, that we felt was really strong. But those two characters come to mind as ones where we did seriously explore it. To my memory, it didn't happen for either. I'm very confident it didn't happen for She-Hulk. I'm like con memory 50-60% sure on the Hulkbuster, but we'll find out in June.
Oh my gosh, that makes me sad because I played Hulkbuster. I actually had him on the stream table, so
very cool.
Like, he's just ridiculous in convocation because he can like bump away with that large base.
All right. Well, you had mentioned alliances. That's like the new shiny thing, and we did get a chance to demo it earlier. It was very cool, like a claustrophobic kind of beat 'em up. There's a lot of translation in MC. So it feels familiar. It's kind of cool to get dropped into a game and you're like already kind of. But it got me wondering if this was more of a supplement or a gateway. Obviously, those two things aren't mutually exclusive, but can you describe the design philosophy or the target audience?
Alliances started initially in my head as a way to create effectively an ultimate encounter system that would allow players with robust or, semi-robust Marvel Crisis Protocol collections to be able to play with players who weren't interested in playing a tabletop miniatures game, right? It was very much inspired by the positive receptions around some of the AI-controlled ultimate encounters like the Ultron, Unstoppable Colossus. It was also influenced by how I had been playing a lot of Marvel Crisis Protocol with my family, which is they very much enjoy the ultimate encounter experience, where I effectively, it's kind of like Marvel Crisis Protocol D&D, right? I am game mastering the game, and because I'm very comfortable ignoring development's rules when I want to, I would just like run the table, and we would do what was fun for everyone involved. So my initial like kind of desktop work thing that I started back in October 27, 2023, I know that because I have pictures on my phone of the original prototype that I did out of paper cut, was all about taking 4 characters from Marvel Crisis Protocol and creating a gridded board game style system that you would just play using all of the same rules, and like nothing would really change except that ranges would be measured by hexes, and the bad guys were little token cutouts that like impeded your progress, and eventually you would work through the stages to have a final boss confrontation. So the way in which the game plays now is exactly identical to the way in which I envisioned it in terms of the progression, right? Players would fight through a couple of stages, they'd get to a big boss battle, and it would be kind of like a combination boss battler and beat 'em up. What changed over time was the level at which it divorced itself from Crisis Protocol. And so I would say, like, initially the idea was what you're talking about, where it was a supplement. It was meant to provide a new way for players that are existing in the community to play, but it was not necessarily meant to bring in new players, right? More or less, right? No one was going to come to alliances as fresh. They would already be playing the miniatures game in some way, or they would know somebody who played the miniatures game and they were introduced to it by them, because that was kind of the function of the overall thing. as we worked on it more and we kind of worked through some of the core issues in the design, because no design ever survives contact with the developer, because they're just really great at tearing things apart, and that's their job. And we talked more about what the game could be, and then combined with the engineers showing us the new technology that they had unlocked through their skill leveling up with PressFit and the Green Goblin and all of this stuff. It's amazing.
That goblin is amazing.
And the fact that it doesn't need glue is just crazy. We started to really have conversations about, well, what if we just made this a standalone board game, its own line that fit within the system. And the funny thing is that we had explored a similar idea in like year 2 of our existence as a studio, but we just didn't have the time and kind of the knowledge, I think, to really like make that work. And so we kind of went back to that, and it said, well, we already explored this once, but now we seem to have this foundation that everyone liked. Everyone was pretty on board with what was there. It just needed a lot of work to make it really function as a fully contained board game and to have all that go. And so we progressed from there, and we added a lot of different elements. Because it became like a fully contained board game, that's where the level up system came from, because originally you just played with a Marvel Crisis Protocol stat card. But for a board game like experience, right, somebody who's fresh and doesn't understand the system, you want them to be able to quickly understand what's going on, because board gamers, you don't really think about a board game all week or while you're at work before you play it like you do a miniatures game, right? You're constantly mentally engaged with a miniatures game. Board gamers, you open it up, you want to be able to play the experience, you want to be able to put it away and not think about it. And so what happened is that we landed on the idea of like, okay, we have to streamline the initial character, the level 1, and then what we can do through a level up system is it very elegantly allows you to be like, here's your character, it's pretty simple. Oh, you've played the game for about like 20 minutes. Here's a new skill. I just have to learn that new skill. You've played for 20 more minutes. Here's another new skill. Great. Like, it progresses you through the process in a way that's very accessible to a player, and they don't have to think a lot about, and it naturally lets you learn what you're supposed to do as you go along. So that's where the level up system came from, and of course players love to level up. The heroic assist thing was a big one that Pagani spearheaded, and it's probably the heart and soul of the game experience, because what it did is it turned the cooperative experience from something that, like, a lot of cooperative games, either one player kind of runs it because it's a cooperative puzzle experience and they're just like, okay, well, I know what we need to do to get out of this, or they kind of have a rolling snowball effect where one player does really, really well, and this is especially true in level up systems. They do really, really well, they gain a bunch of levels, and then they're just like godlike compared to everyone else, and no one can ever catch them. And so we wanted to try to avoid both of those problems, and the way in which the heroic assist thing is so great is that it encourages the people at the table, and hopefully you had this experience too as you played, to communicate with each other and to work as a team and to say, okay, well, I can complete the scenario, but I need one extra power and I need one extra space of movement to do it. And then another player's like, oh, well, I can definitely get this guy, so let me go and I'll get this guy, then I'll give you an assist. And they're like, okay, who else can do an assist? And it's like, well, I could probably get you an assist, but I need this. And then the other player's like, well, I can get you that. And all of a sudden you're always communicating with each other. You have this dynamic like teamwork build, and I think it does an incredible job. That rules inclusion by Pagani does an incredible job of doing a lot of board games forget, which is that what makes board games experiences so magical is when they always keep you focused on the people you're playing with and not the board, right? The board is important, but the people you're playing with are more important because that's the shared experience. And that heroic assist system really does that. So at the end of the day, my long-winded answer to your question is that where I think it ended up is it's a bridge. I call it a bridge product, which is that it is entirely designed for anyone to pick up who just wants a Marvel board game. And it does some really amazing things because the press fit allows you to learn that building miniatures is fun and enjoyable and easy. You can be successful at it. And we've seen a lot of success with the press fit stuff internally for like executives who have never built a miniature before. So the stuff you do is cool, but I don't want to do it. And we'd be like, well, why don't you just build this while we give you a presentation? And they'll kind of fiddle with it and they'll start building it. And by the end, they have this, they have this Adam miniature, they have this Spider-Man in front of them. And they're like, can I have another one? And I'm just like, yeah, it's pretty fun, isn't it? It's pretty enjoyable. And that was kind of a really great litmus test when we had that executive meeting, and I watched as each of them built the one that I had put in front of them. And afterwards, they were like, can I get a couple more to take home? And I was like, yes, you can. You can indeed do that. We had really hit that. So it does that. I think it shows that, there is this space that has been unexplored with tabletop board games that you don't have to have a resin cast or a PVC miniature. You can have high quality hard plastic, and it can be price competitive. Alliances is going to be like around $100. It's less than $100. It's like $99, I think, in the U.S. because of the a little less globally. So you compare it to like everything else in the market that has similar amounts of miniatures. It's got 23 miniatures in it, all the board game stuff. I think it's really going to show people that there's more that can be done if you're willing to put in the effort to do it. And then, as you noted, it sneakily has all the DNA still of Marvel Crisis Protocol. It teaches you the dice system. It teaches you the power system. It teaches you largely how you roll defense and how you attack. So when we include, the 5 Marvel stat cards for Spider-Man, Miles, Black Cat, Ghost Spider, and the Green Goblin, and there's a little note in the book that says, you also got these Marvel Crisis Protocol stat cards. This is for a tabletop miniatures battle game. If you want to know more, go download the free rules, and you can use this stuff even more, right? You want to expand your Marvel Crisis Protocol experience? Here it is, and you already have it. And once you get 2 boxes of Marvel Alliances, you now have 10 characters, and that's a full roster, right? So it gives the people who want that opportunity to explore more. And I don't think that will be everyone, right? It'll be some percentage. You don't know what. But again, it's a bridge. It just lets them come over. It lets them explore. It gives them the value they need to be able to come over and do that. And then from the tabletop miniatures gaming experience, I think what it does is it bridges the love and the joy that we have when we play the tabletop miniatures games with people in our lives that, you just realize like there are some people in your life that would love to play with you, but this is not for them, right? They're just not going to be able to interact with it in a way that's possible. So now you can say, hey, I know you want to be a part of something that I really love and enjoy. Hopefully Alliances has enough of the DNA in it for you that you do love and enjoy it in a similar way, and you can be like, let's play this together instead, right? I think about, experiences when my kids were younger. They're very much like Crisis Protocol players now, and they can play Shatterpoint and all those things because they're teenagers. But, when they were like 8, 9, 10, and they would be like, I want to play, this would be a perfect opportunity to be like, okay, let's start here. Let's bring this in, and we're going to play these cool heroes, and we're going to work together as a family, and we're going to like make it all work. And then that's going to seed them with the possibilities of what comes next, what they can do later. Or our neighborhood like has a lot of families with other kids, and they often will come over for game night because we have all these board games, shocker, that, I'm sitting here pushing all these different games on, and we'll often get into conversations like, what do you do for a living? And I'll explain it to them. They'll be like, so are any of these games yours? And I'm like, well, not these ones, but, these ones here. And they're like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. I mean, sometime I'd like to play that. And then I start talking about like kind of what that would entail, and their eyes glaze over. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really think that you're probably of the mindset, but, if you ever want to try, go for it. So the idea that, I can bring in Alliances at some and have a game night and have these people over and be like, let's play my game, and know that they're going to have a great time with it because it's going to hit all these boxes. And then from there, maybe when they're like, oh, I want to try the actual miniatures game, I'll be like, cool, you already know basically everything you need to play. So we're just going to go over a couple of other things, like you're going to use movement instead of a grid. That's about it, and let's just roll. That's really exciting. So I do think it's a bridge. I think it's meant for both. But at the end of the day, what we really focused on as the product evolved was making the best board game, because we knew that that was the audience that wanted to attract the most. Assumed that because of the shared DNA, because of like the style of play and everything else, that some percentage, hopefully a large percentage of the Crisis Protocol would also really.
Well, I think including the alternate sculpts definitely helps there. And I believe it's new character cards, like new design.
No,
is it new art?
Sorry. Yeah. So the characters that are in MCO 1, 2, and 3 are all alternate sculpts for existing characters. Oh, some of them, not all of them. It's all new. If they didn't have Patrick Brown art, it's been updated to Patrick Brown art.
That makes sense. And by including the MCP cards, like the first hit of crack is free. So will we? With that being said, with the inclusion, will we see Alliance included in the boxes, like moving forward, or character updates through the boxes?
I don't think so. The plan is not to have exclusivity, right? But is there a world in which characters will come first to Alliances? Absolutely. I think that is just totally realistic and I feel like acceptable, right? From my perspective, but the goal will be not to lock those things necessarily behind alliances in general. I know some players are just not going to be interested in that, and they're going to want to be able to get those characters separately. So, maybe some new characters come out in MCA 04, for example, whatever that is. And later on, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months down the line, those characters in there, the exact characters that are in there come out in an MCP, character pack, because we can reutilize that tooling. And so that, I think, is absolutely, just like these characters that are MCA now came out in MCP first, I think MCA absolutely has the opportunity to have characters in it first and then have them come over. As far as like character updates and stuff, it is possible that as we like do these boxes and we look at like what's coming, we might go, oh yeah, we should update this guy, and then obviously that would become like a print and play option, and it would benefit that. So there are certainly opportunities, I think, where if we're doing a character and we're like, we're going to put the stat card in anyway. We always thought that maybe we were going to do a relook. Let's do a relook. Let's do it. Similar to how the reissues and the repack system is, but it's not necessarily like hard coded into in the way that the statement we made on the repacks, where we were like, every time we plan a repack, when we get to that point, we're going to relook at all the characters. I don't think that rule is as hard and fast as it is. Like, I think if the inspiration strikes us, we might do it, but otherwise it'll just be like, yep, we're pretty happy with the character as they are now. No need to do a.
I just have a real quick. Is there any plan for having the game at some of the broader market, that since it's more?
So as far as the distribution and stuff, like going into specialty, going into mass, we designed the game with the knowledge. It's really great that we work with Asmodee as the publisher and the distribution, right? The studio is not independent. It is part of the Asmodee Corporation. And so we're able to really glean a lot from them. Ultimately, they will be the ones that make that decision, but we did design the game for specialty, right? Like the price point, the kind of like the contents, those types of things, the box footprint, all of those things were very much intentionally done to ensure that it would have success should a specialty avenue open up, like Barnes & Noble or something like that. Mass, like true mass, like Target, Walmart, those types of things, I think the game is probably still a little too high priced for that. Like you would need a more streamlined version, because you don't really see too many games over like $60 in that kind of environment, unless it's on their website, right? They sell a lot of stuff on the website now, but in store it's a little different. But absolutely, like I do believe that, and the intention was to create a product that could have a broader reach, which meant we were thinking about specialty as an option. It will be up to Asmodee and their determination on their sales and their distribution side to determine if they want to do that. But fingers crossed that we might actually see some MCP alliances in somewhere like a Barnes & Noble or a Calendar Go game store.
So you mentioned those executives that took the miniatures and assembled them. Did any of them paint them?
That's a good question. I don't think so. Dallas has not cornered them into painting, although we have done opportunities where they come to visit the office and we'll be like, hey, do you want to learn how to paint? And then Dallas will walk them through how to paint. I think that's stage 2, right? But obviously just getting them to assemble them and be like, oh, these are really cool, look at that. That was a pretty big win. But maybe next time they'll come back, we'll do a little paint and take with them, and we'll be like, all right, let's paint. Just take off the expensive suit jacket so that you don't get paint on the suit, and then we'll be good to go.
So we got a lot of new affiliations shown off yesterday. What was the thought process with all those affiliations, specifically like Thunderbolts and I can't remember what it was called. Well, that, and I can't remember what Onslaughts. That's what it was. Okay, yeah. What was the thought process on those?
Thunderbolts was an easy one. It's one that I think, outside of a famous first family for Marvel, it's probably the one thing for the game that has come up the most. When are we going to see Thunderbolts? When are we going to see Thunderbolts? So with Red Hulk coming, it was a really easy. Thunderbolts was going to happen. And we were going to kind of base it a bit on the Code Red Thunderbolts because that's the one he led. But since Crisis Protocol is kind of its own universe, we got to do some. And so that one I think was a no-brainer. The path to Intelligentsia was a little bit more like windy. When you create a character called the Leader, he better have a leadership. It's just kind of the rule, I think. And I didn't want to be the guy who was like behind a design where it was like, his name's the leader. Does he have a leadership? Nope, sure doesn't. Exactly. What is he doing? So as I was kind of doing the initial design on him, knowing that he was going to have a leadership, my problem that I ran into was I was like, well, where he fits, where he could be a leader in the current affiliations, they were very leader heavy, right? It was Cabal, Criminal Syndicate were kind of the ones that made the most. There were a couple others that might have been a stretch, but they didn't really feel right. And so what I did was I remembered that he had been part of the intelligence, and so I just did a little research on it and tried to figure out who the members like have been. And the question really becomes, when we're looking at adding a new affiliation like that, do we have enough of a foundation that we can get kind of close enough, and then we can fill in the rest by saying, well, we are like the 616, but Crisis Protocol is not the 616. And the good news is that when we looked at it, we had MODOK, we had a couple others that hit, and so I felt really comfortable being like, okay, we're going to make the Crisis Protocol version of the Intelligentsia. He's going to be the leader, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that because it's going to be a very different style of affiliation. It's like the supervillain genius affiliation that doesn't want to punch you; they want you to punch yourself, right? I totally imagine. When I told Ben, I was like, look. This is what this guy does. He basically is the guy who he's like, why are you punching yourself as like you're hitting yourself? Yeah, exactly. That's kind of his shtick, right? It's his vibe. And so Ben had a great time like kind of developing the team tactic cards and doing some tricks and traps, and we had a little bit of foundation from that from MODOK Scientist Supremes of team tactic cards, like the one where he makes you gamble on the stacks and those types of things, the mind games one. Yeah, it's a fun little like thematic mechanic. It's not particularly powerful in game, but it is pretty. And so we kind of like use that as a little bit of a foundation to say, okay, well, what does a super genius do in Crisis Protocol, and how would an affiliation full of these brainiacs really function? So Intelligentsia was one of those unknown, unexpected destination. And then for Onslaught's Grasp, obviously. Onslaught, he's a big bad. He takes control of all these different Marvel characters' minds and uses them as pawns, and he's not going to listen to nobody, no how. So we had another kind of Dormammu situation on our hands where we knew that he needed to have an affiliate, and the way in which we approached that was definitely an exciting time, because Dormammu is really unique in that the way in which his leadership works says you can never make another Dormammu. And we knew that when we did it, because the game kind of blue screens when you have two characters that say both have to be, right? Must. It's a must. You can't have those two things happen at the same time. So we had a lot of conversations about like, well, do we need to adjust Dormammu so like these things can happen? We do have a keyword Peerless, which also can help out for sure. And that is a big trick. So it kind of came about to where we were like, okay, how are we going to do this? And Onslaught's Grasp really became an affiliation that it borrows idea, Apocalypse from a couple of the other characters that have had more and Pagani really had a blast like creating it, or Onslaught's like his guy. So he's been waiting 7 years to do it. So he really like poured his heart into kind of like the overall how that affiliation, how that stuff would work. And then Onslaught himself was a really unique challenge to work on because he's so powerful and what he does is so potent. But how do you translate that into a game where it's going to feel good, but also not be too overpowering? And the leadership really played into that, because the reason that I say he kind of has some Apocalypse kind of vibes is that he's not a great splash. He really needs to have his affiliation and be in affiliation, and to really be able to unlock it. So it was a fun kind of combination. It was a fun process to go and bring this really nutso character to life that is kind of Charles Xavier and Eric Magnus.
The way you're describing Onslaught reminds me a lot of Apocalypse. Obviously you're being vague, but when you're describing it, I think of Apocalypse, the experience of playing him and the powerful ability. Would you say that he's unique as Apocalypse?
No, he doesn't have quite the level of craziness that Apocalypse has, where like you have certain selections and you're distributing these things, right? It's a much more traditional affiliation, but the way in which that affiliation powers him and like interacts with his kit, and the way in which he linchpins that affiliation, and the affiliation kind of linchpin is very similar, right? Like, one of the big successes for Apocalypse, despite the fact that maybe the leadership is slightly overtuned and that's going to be adjusted here, is that the goal with him was we didn't really want to see Apocalypse splashed. Like, you could do it, but it wasn't going to be optimal. The way in which you wanted to run Apocalypse was, and that was really a guidepost that we felt like we were very successful with him, and we wanted to translate to on. And so that's really where a lot of that DNA was shared the two, not so much in Onslaught is a lot more traditional.
I do want to point out DNA, Onslaught, Apocalypse, mutant jokes, ha ha ha. My poor Apocalypse heart. I hate hearing the nerfs, but I understand. Any affiliations that we're allowed to know about that may not have been mentioned?
You're asking me to remember things that weren't on the presentation. So, New Avengers, which I don't really think is a secret. We kind of talked about it briefly at Mini Extravaganza, but obviously Hulkling, Speed, Wiccan, America Chavez, Patriot, and Kate Bishop are going to be coming out at the start of next year. They are going to form a brand new affiliation with the New Avengers. That was a fun one to work on. Patriot will be one of the leaders. Kate Bishop has another leadership for them. So they come out of the gate swinging with a couple of different build options, and they play very differently depending on who the leader is. A lot of fun to work on those. Wiccan actually was one of my favorite designs that actually got through because so I don't remember, but probably it seems like that's probably likely. But yeah, so we came up with a really zany way to represent his chaos magic. And the fact that he doesn't really control exactly what happens. And so every time he makes an attack, instead of having a wild trigger, he has a superpower that says, when you make a successful attack, you roll a die, and then there's a menu of options. And based on what you roll, that's the trigger that happens.
That's cool.
It's like Moonlight level over. And then if that wasn't enough to give Ben a true aneurysm, he has a superpower where he can spend power to give that ability, that chaos magic, to it. So when they make an attack, they get to roll on the chart and have a random effect happen from the chart. And he was like, "This is insane." And I was like, it's a bit out there, but I would like you to play it because I think it's really cool and I think it'll work. And he came back, I think he came back to the next dev meeting. He's like, "Well, we play tested it. It was super fun." And I was like, "Yeah, I got one." But yeah, so Wiccan was a blast, and I'm a sucker for a menu, and if it's a randomized menu, even better. He really was one that I'm pretty excited about. I'm excited for players to explore that. So New Avengers is coming. There are several new affiliations, but we're not shown on the roadmap. As we've kind of discussed and mentioned, one of our big kind of desires is to reduce the time from announcement because we've kind of gotten into a situation where we were showing things off and it was pretty exciting to see what the far future was, but then getting to that far future, people kind of lost the excitement. They lost. And so the adjustment now, what we're trying to do, and the reason that this roadmap didn't really show that people hadn't seen it and the things they had, is because what we would have shown we're now going to be able to show. And so ideally, when you find out what we did show you now, a little later, it's going to be like, "Oh my God, that's so amazing." And it comes out in 5 months. Yes, please, right? Or 3 months or whatever. And I think that's just going to be more exciting for the community, healthier for the game, and being able to maintain excitement for us to be able to do and more inspiring things, right? Like surprise drops. We're really getting back into the videography, and as you've probably seen, doing things like that, and being able to exercise those more so that we can really go kind of back to our roots where we used to be able to really surprise people and then have that stuff and the scope of the roadmaps and what we were trying to cover and the excitement of showing things and sharing, I think kind of got away from us. And while it was enjoyable for players to know so far, ideally at this point we've kind of earned enough trust that we're fully committed and invested in the game that we don't have to show future, and instead we can start being excited about the things that are coming next rather than the big thing. But there are some pretty cool affiliations that are to be able to talk about when the next round of reveals happen. Some of those I think will blow.
All right, so of course, for those of you that couldn't hear David, that's at least 3 drinks. He said convocation 3 times, just so you're aware.
So of course I get the Sentinels question.
Okay, sure.
So obviously it's one of the smaller factions. I actually wanted to play affiliate, and I realized you couldn't even play it at 1980. So now it's not. So what are the design challenge finishing, and one that's kind of there, but isn't really fleshed out. Now it will be. So what are some of the working in that?
I don't know if there's a ton of challenges when you take a small affiliation like we've taken with Wakanda or Asgard or now Sentinels and expanding it to, kind of the level at which some of those sit at. It becomes, the bigger the affiliation gets, the more challenging it is to find value. Like, eventually you're at a point to where it's like, okay, well, what makes this character stand out versus this character? Where does this person fit within the affiliation, and then in other affiliations? And sometimes that can be because a character has a spread of affiliations. Sometimes it's because they bring new tech. Sometimes it's just because, like, well, this is a fan favorite character, and there are players who just want to play with this character, so they don't really need to offer anything new. They can compete with somebody else, and they have an equal. With the Sentinels specifically, I think the big goal was to try to give a different flavor of playstyle and approach. The original Sentinels were very much designed to be the mutant hunter and kill their HK robot. The Primarch 4 leadership is very much based on Owen and Daisy and getting more power for that, and going out and eliminating the mutant. With Bastion specifically, what I wanted to try to emphasize in the design was to give them more mutant suppression and capture mode, where they have the power control collars, they have mutant suppression protocol, they can depress the X gene and all of that stuff that we've seen. And so they weaken their enemies, and that allows them their enemies, not necessarily. And so that led to a very different approach. You saw a lot of root, you see a lot of power suppression in there, like how do we shut down? And the big challenge with that was largely, okay, when you do control-y type stuff, to think about your Lokis, you these other things, you have to walk a very being suppressive to be, and how a player on the opposite side of that table. And as Pagani kind of points out or talks about, when you get into the feeling sense, it becomes much more of a to design well, because you can't prove things with math, you can't really prove feelings with data. So you can look at something and say completely, like, by the numbers, this is perfectly fine. But if your players continuously say, yeah, but it feels bad, the feeling overrides the reality. And so it's a lot of adjustments on, like, making the opponent feel like they have decent, making the opponent feel like, yes, there's a challenge before, but overcoming the tool, but exciting to do. And, it's a fine line to walk, and some of the balance is good, sometimes the balance is a little off. But we rely on a lot of our playtime high-level competitive players, but more of the standard, like, narrative casual player. But they're not going to be winding up going, they play in tournaments on guaranteed games. And those players can give really valuable feedback on that. Like, how did it feel to play against it? Did you feel like you had a chance? Did you feel overwhelmed? Did it feel fair? Those are all things that can prove with numbers a subjective sensation of those. And so I think that was the biggest challenge with the Sentinel. Nimrod, of course, he kind of falls more into the camp of, like, a destroy the mutant threat rather than suppress the mutant threat, but he sits alone. And then, of course, the other thing was, and this was to our benefit, is that it might have been challenging had we been stuck with the original, if we hadn't rebalanced. But the reality is that we were able to, through kind of the sequence of events, redo the entire affiliation as a whole. So we kind of started from, because at the same time that we were doing the rebalance work on the original Sentinels, we were also working on the development and playtesting of. So we really got a unique kind of approach. We did holistically get to on the entire affiliate in a way that many affiliations that have organically grown over time have not had. And so I think that made the process really enjoyable, and was very unique in terms of it. Like, we haven't been able to do that, like, really ever since the game started, because everything has been building blocks. And while we have rebalanced a lot of the original stuff, it's never been at the same time as we've been working. So that was really fun, and it was kind of unique and very different experience. But I think overall, I'm hopeful that when players get their hands on all the Sentinels, it's really going to shine through with how they synergize, how they offer these playstyles, how everything works together, because we had that opportunity to be able to look at everything, design everything holistically, and make changes based on what we...
So I have a question specifically about the Prime Sentinels.
Okay.
How keep players from not confuse the Prime Sentinels with the Sentinel Prime?
I mean, I don't really have an answer to that question. I think this is one of those things where you get into those naming conventions, and it's like, well, you got Sentinel Prime Mark IV, and you got Prime Sentinels, and you have Omega Sentinels, and then there's technically Omega Prime Sentinels, like, eventually.
It's sound very GW.
It's all word salad, and it's been kind of set up. So I think I think, the community will probably solve that problem for us because you are very good at coming up with ways in which to kind of handle those things. But yeah, I don't really have a great answer. It's definitely one of those that you kind of look at and you're like, yep, there's a lot of shared, and that might get a little. But then again, the community has come up with a lot of nicknames that have really stuck, and then once that happens, so we'll see. It's like Thor 2, right? The numbering system. So I assume that the community, you'll solve it for like the lingo to make what is what. But otherwise, the only answer I can really give you is always use the full name every time.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. So, AdeptiCon, I don't know if you call it the start of the new year or the end of the year, but either way, do you have kind of like any final closing thoughts on a 30,000-foot state of the game, where you feel like the game is at, and how you...
Woo! Where do I... So, I think over, my takeaway is that there's still work to do. The game isn't perfect, but the game will never be perfect. And that is one of the joys and one of the constant challenge of a living, breathing game. And one that has so many variables. And every time we release new, it becomes exponentially more to kind of deal with and balance. I am very proud of the work that we have done. I think where the game is, it is better than it was yesterday and a year before, and I feel like we're in the best spot ever. And as long as we're making progress forward, then to me that's very good. And I don't think there's always been times where I could, but the last round of core ruling overall had a dramatically positive impact. We have another big swing coming with like kind of resetting the baseline with this big character update with all, reducing the lethality of the game to make the game more enjoyable, to bring characters that are overshadowed, like 3 threats especially, like wider teams, to bring them back into the limelight, to provide more interesting meta counterplay and opportunities. We have the new Operation Zero Tolerance crisis cards, which I think also lean a bit more into this, and the way in which you have more diversity in your list construction, and the way in which you approach the game, and your thoughts about it. So like overall, I feel like the game is very healthy. I think we are in a really great place. I think there's been no better time fit. And if you're a veteran player who's been playing for years, hopefully you're just as excited about the possibilities and the game provides today as you were when you first started. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be a bit more to tweak, to adjust. There's going to be new things to come through, and I think that's also very exciting, right? But in the end, my 30,000-foot view is the fact that like we seem to exist in a place. The game has never been better, offers a lot of opportunity and can be improved. But if it never was improved, I think I could, if I had to walk away into the set, I think I could do so feeling like I had done and that I was leaving behind something that, I could be proud of and that had brought, over the next course of many, many years. Thankfully, that's not the case, so I'm going to continue to hammer away at it with our amazing team, Pagani, myself, Ben, and everyone else, Dallas. We're going to continue to make cool things, explore the Marvel Universe, and create awesome stuff, and hopefully surprise and wow you all. And when we make missteps along the way, we'll... but yeah, that's kind of... I'm really happy.
So you just mentioned Pagani, Ben, Dallas. We're a rowdy crew. When are we going to get those 3 with you?
All you got to do is ask. We'll bring them on.
Easy enough.
Yeah, they're always up for a good chat. So yeah, anytime you want to bring on the other folks, like or bring us all on together, like reach out. Everyone loves to have a good discussion and a round table. And they'll obviously be able to add some unique views and some different thoughts, and you might even see us squabble amongst ourselves, which is always a great time. A little inside baseball.
Well, we sure do appreciate the time. We appreciate all the work that you guys have put in. I think as much as there's times where we're point out things that we're not thrilled about, I think we agree that for the most part, the games we're thrilled to be really appreciate get to talk to you about it. So, thanks again. We appreciate it. Webheads, we'd love to hear what you think. Drop us a line and let us know. Other than that, until next time, Webheads, be good.